My toxic half-sister was kicked out instead of me. I was kicked out of the house, but years later, I am engaged, and my fiancé's company terminated the contract with my sister's husband. Now she blames me for this. I am 26 years old and have been engaged to my fiancé Jeff for 2 months. I met him 4 years ago through a dating app, and since then, we have been inseparable. Jeff and I are kindred spirits. He is the only person in my life who has never let me down. My life hasn't been easy. My parents divorced when I was 2 years old, and my father left the family and we never communicated again. Yes, he paid alimony, but that was it. He never tried to meet me or find out how I was doing. My mom, who is 48 now, honestly, wasn't a good mother in my childhood either. She was more occupied with her own affairs than with my upbringing. I was practically raised by nannies and babysitters. When I grew up, it became obvious that my mom had me at a fairly young age, and her priorities were completely different. She didn't care much about me. She spent time with friends or on dates. She was a sociable socialite, and she never had time for me. She didn't even take her job seriously. She was a freelance artist, earning decent money every month, but the alimony helped her provide for me. It hurts me to say this, but I am almost sure that if it weren't for that money, my mom would have kicked me out long ago. She never had a special attachment to me, and I mostly felt that she was waiting for me to grow up and leave her in peace. When I was about 13 years old, she started dating my stepfather, whose name was Matt. He was 50 years old and had a daughter my age, let's call her Jess. When they started dating, my mom first brought them to meet me. She asked me to behave perfectly and said that it was very important to her. She had brought home guys thousands of times before, but she never cared about my behavior. Usually, she would just say that guests were coming, and I would take it as a signal to go to my room and stay there until everyone left. But this time, I felt that my mom was serious about this man, otherwise, she wouldn't have cared about my behavior or, more precisely, my presence in the house. When I first met my stepfather and his daughter, they were quite kind to me, and the first meeting went well. I couldn't have imagined what awaited me after that. Soon, Matt started coming to our house more often, and then it seemed like they had practically moved in with us. This didn't bother me, so I didn't pay much attention to it as long as they let me live my life. For a long time, everything remained as it was. It was as if they lived with us, and Jess would come over sometimes. Her mom was still present in her life, so she spent half the month at her place. At first, they either treated me normally or just ignored me, and I was quite okay with that because I didn't really care about them. I didn't even care what I wanted, I just wanted peace and quiet, and for a while, I had that. But then they decided to move in with us permanently. I wouldn't have minded, but my mom said that since they were moving in, would have to share my room with my half-sister. I stood my ground and said I wouldn't do that because it was my room. It had been mine my whole life, and it was the only place in the house where I could feel at ease. It was my little corner, and I wasn't going to sacrifice my freedom for someone I barely knew. When I told my mom that I wasn't going to share my room, we had a huge fight. She threatened to kick me out of the house if I didn't do as she wanted. I was only 14 then, but I already knew the law. I understood that my mom was not someone to be trusted, so I had to learn about it. Besides, common sense told me that she couldn't kick me out until I became an adult, otherwise she would have problems with the law. I told her I knew she was bluffing. My mom was angry, but she had to give in and let me keep my room. She decided to fix up the basement as a room for Jess. It wasn't the worst place, but it wasn't as cozy as my room. My mom really tried to decorate it and make it livable. When she finished, the basement looked as good as any other room in the house. So I didn't understand what the problem was at all, but it was at that moment that Jess began to hate me. Perhaps it was because on the day she moved in, my mom gave everyone a tour of the house and emphasized that Jess had to live in the basement because I refused to share my room with her. I didn't understand why she said that, and I still can't find an explanation for it. Perhaps my mom wanted me to feel ashamed about it, but all she achieved was that I felt uncomfortable. I even felt a little sorry for her, but not for insisting on my own, or maybe my mom just liked to create drama and wanted Jess to know that I refused to share my room with her, which inevitably led to problems between us, and my mom was right. Jess couldn't accept it. After that, she started treating me like an enemy. For half the month, she still lived at her mom's, but the days she spent at our house were hell for me. Jess was a real threat to society, and it seemed she was serious about going after me. She was constantly rude and made awful remarks right to my face, you see. One day she claimed that my father left my mom because of me, and then she laughed as if it were very funny. She constantly made fun of my appearance because at that time I was a bit overweight, and she just bullied me for no reason at all. At school, Jess had her own gang of mean girls, and she never missed a chance to ridicule me along with her company. Before that, she and her friends used to just ignore me, and I was fine with that. We were never friends with Jess, but that was much better than being her enemy. The saddest thing is that I didn't do anything bad to her at all. She got offended just because I didn't want to share my room with her. It was such a stupid reason to hate me and try to turn my life into a nightmare. My room was my safe haven, and with a mother like mine, no one would blame me for wanting to have at least a little personal space. Besides, if Jess had at least tried to get to know me first, maybe I would have shared my room, but she was a stranger to me, and I didn't feel comfortable sacrificing my freedom for her. I never complained to my mom or Matt about Jess's behavior because they already knew and there was no point in talking to them about it. They didn't care, they could have let me be bullied all my life, and they would just turn a blind eye to it because I was nothing to them. So I had no choice but to endure and let Jess walk all over me. Sometimes I tried to fight back, but I soon realized that it only made things worse. Then our parents would intervene, and I would end up being blamed and punished. Of course, they hated me. Jess could always burst into tears on cue and avoid punishment, but I couldn't cry on command, and I definitely wasn't such a manipulator. That's why all the responsibility for bad behavior fell on me, and I was told that I should start treating Jess like a sister while she remained unpunished. It was terrible, and I hated my life. So when I was finally kicked out close to my 18th birthday, I felt more relief than anything else. I had endured the madness of my family for years, and with each year it only got worse. Jess continued to be a nightmare, and our parents continued to support her, never doubting the truthfulness of her actions. In a year, she managed to turn the entire class against me at school, and I was left with only a couple of people who even wanted to talk to me. Everyone else hated me just because Jess did, and that was enough. All of this hit my mental state hard, and it was difficult for me to cope with any aspects of my life. I gained a lot of weight because I was eating away my stress, and it had a terrible effect on my appearance. I became fat, I had skin problems, my hair looked awful, and I also couldn't cope with my studies. So not only did I look bad, but I also seemed stupid to everyone. There was nothing good in my life, and I had reached my lowest point. Things at home weren't any better because I still had to deal with Jess, my mom, and my stepfather. My mom was becoming more and more unbearable, constantly comparing me to Jess. Despite knowing that it was Jess who had turned my life into a nightmare, before my mom married Matt and they moved in with us, things were bad, but not that bad. Yes, it was unpleasant that my mom didn't care about me before, but after her marriage, the situation went from bad to terrible. She stopped just ignoring me and began to actively make me feel worthless. It was obvious to me that Jess was the daughter my mom had always dreamed of, but fate had other plans, and she got me. I knew that they both wished I wasn't around, and honestly, I wanted the same. My mom and Jess hated me, but I didn't care. I had no family other than my mom because my grandparents didn't keep in touch with us, and I had never known my father, so I wasn't familiar with the other side of the family. I literally had nowhere to go, and I was embarrassed to ask friends for help, so I had no choice but to endure and live with my mom to at least have a roof over my head and food every day, at least until I turned 18. But a couple of weeks before my 18th birthday, something happened that got me kicked out the same day. It was a day off, and I still remember that day as if it were yesterday because it was one of the most traumatic and stressful days in my life at that time. We had just finished school, and Jess had a friend whose brother was in his last year of college, and Jess was dating him, so she and her friend often spent time with his friends who were a bit older than us. I knew what they were doing there, but I didn't see the point in telling my parents about it because with my luck, it would only have backfired on me. So I never told anyone that Jess had developed bad habits. I was never into any of that because, firstly, I never had such cool friends who could get alcohol, cigarettes, or anything else, and secondly, I was already struggling with being overweight and poor grades, so adding bad habits to the mix was definitely not something I wanted. I had enough problems as it was. But that day, it seems I forgot to lock my room before I went to take a shower. The next moment, I heard someone banging loudly on the bathroom door, and my mom was yelling, demanding that I come out immediately. I hurried to get dressed to see what was going on. When I came out of the bathroom, my mom, Matt, and Jess were already waiting for me in the room with very serious faces. My mom pulled out from under my bed a bunch of empty beer bottles and then, what was worse, a huge bag of something even worse. I knew for sure it wasn't mine, and Jess knew too, but my parents didn't know that. It seems she somehow planted it in my room while I was gone and then told my mom. Everyone started yelling at me, calling me terrible. My mom began saying that I was a complete disappointment. She complained that I was just eating their food, called me useless, and was convinced that I would never achieve anything in life. She added that I would just live with them and spend their money. I tried several times to explain that it wasn't mine and that I didn't even know how all that ended up in my room, but she didn't believe me. She completely lost her temper when I suggested that Jess might have planted it to set me up. My mom started screaming that I had always been jealous of Jess and that I would never be as good as her, and that's why I was trying to blame her. I was already sobbing like crazy, but even that didn't stop her. She continued to yell at me. After some time, she fell silent and declared that I had to leave. I didn't understand what she was talking about and asked where I was supposed to go. She replied that she didn't care where, but she no longer wanted to see me in the house because she was tired of me. When I said I wouldn't go, she threatened to call the police. Since I was almost 18, she said the police would take the charge of possession of illegal substances very seriously. My mom stated that she didn't want me living in her house and sucking her money. She said that now I would have to take care of myself because she was no longer going to play happy family with someone who doesn't deserve it. I begged my mom not to kick me out because, although I wanted to leave, I knew I had nowhere to go and I didn't have enough money. But my mom didn't care. She said that if I didn't leave today, she would really call the police and turn me in. I was stunned by her cruelty. Even more, I was surprised that neither Matt nor Jess even tried to object. They just continued to go about their business as if nothing had happened. After a lot of tears and pleading, I realized I had no other choice. I started packing my things because between being arrested for possession of substances and living on the street, I would choose the latter. By evening, I had finished packing. When I left the house, no one said goodbye to me, and I didn't look back either. I went to the park and sat on a bench for a couple of hours, but then it got very cold, and I decided to go to my friend's house to spend the night, hoping she would take me in. I headed to my best friend M's house and asked if I could stay with her for a couple of days. She already knew how my parents treated me, so I didn't have to explain anything. I told her what had happened that day, and she was shocked. M said her parents could help me if I let them. I had always asked her not to share details about how my parents treated me with anyone, including her family, because I wasn't sure if people would believe me, and I felt embarrassed to share such personal things. But that day she insisted that I tell her parents everything, and they were just as shocked as she was. They called my mom and tried to talk to her, but it was to no avail. My mom was rude, and they realized that talking wouldn't change the situation. Then they did something I will always be grateful for. they said I could live with them for as long as I needed, and they would support me. They were wealthy people, so money wasn't an issue for them, and Em loved me, so she was willing to share her room with me. I spent the next few years living with them and attending a local college because that was the only place that accepted me due to my poor grades. I started working and saving money to eventually find my own place, but Em's parents did everything they could to make sure I didn't feel pressured and didn't rush to move out. They did their best to make me feel comfortable. About 3 years ago, I finally saved enough to move out. I was proud of myself and at the same time incredibly grateful to Em and her parents. Without them, I wouldn't have made it. Even on the day I moved out, they helped me settle into my new place and told me that I could always come back, whether it's just to visit or to live if I needed to. That moment was a turning point in my life. By that time, I had lost a lot of weight, my health had improved, I felt and looked much better, and I was earning enough to support myself. After working hard on myself, I decided to start dating because I wanted to eventually get married and knew it was time to find a partner. Before meeting Jeff, I met several guys, but everything ended before it even began. When I met Jeff, I finally understood why, because we are meant for each other, and all the other guys I had met before were just casual acquaintances, nothing more. When we started dating, I didn't know he was rich and the heir to his father's company. I liked him because he was funny, handsome, and seemed genuinely nice to me. A few months after the start of our relationship, he told me about his family, and I learned that they own a chain of restaurants that he will inherit in a couple of years when his father retires. Many might think that knowing about his wealth changed something for me, but honestly, I continued to see in him the same person I knew before. This information didn't affect my feelings. I loved him just as much as before. A year after the start of the relationship, we moved in together. A couple of months before that, he introduced me to his family, and everyone in his family liked me, and we got along well. Everything was just perfect. And recently, when he proposed to me, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We have been engaged for 2 months, and everything is going great. But 2 weeks ago, I received a letter from Jess. We haven't been in touch for almost 8 years, and since I was kicked out of the house, I haven't heard from my family. I didn't understand why she suddenly decided to write to me. A lot of time had passed, and neither of us cared about restoring the relationship, but after reading the letter, I realized that she wanted to apologize for everything that happened in the past and admit that she had behaved terribly. This surprised me a lot. She confessed that she planted the stuff in my room to get me kicked out because she hated me for no reason. I had no idea why she decided to confess after all these years, but I immediately felt that something was off. The timing was too suspicious. She must have found out about my engagement. I posted about it on social media, and since we went to the same school, someone probably told her about it. All of this looked very suspicious, so I decided to investigate the situation. In the process, I learned that Jess's husband owns a company that supplies plastic containers and other takeaway items to the restaurants of Jeff's family. This was quite easy to find out. I just created a fake profile and started browsing through her profiles through her photos. I found her husband's profile where he detailed his work in the biography. I already knew a lot about Jeff's family business because we planned to do this business together when his father retired. I was learning about the business. When I realized that her husband was the supplier that Jeff's company works with, I immediately told him about it. In the last few years, I tried not to think about my past life. I didn't subscribe to members of my family on social media and asked friends not to tell me news about them, so I didn't even know that Jess had been married for several years. But when I found out that her husband was supplying Jeff's restaurants, we decided to terminate the contract. These supplies were already costing us too much, and more importantly, I couldn't afford to have anything to do with this woman again, even in business matters. Jeff also said that the quality of the products supplied by her husband had noticeably deteriorated over the years. They were already thinking about changing the supplier and were negotiating with another company that offered lower prices and better goods. Last week, a couple of days after receiving the letter from Jess, Jeff decided to meet with her husband and terminate the contract. But for some reason, Jess decided that I did it on purpose to get revenge on her and started blaming me through posts on social media. We haven't been in touch for almost 10 years, but she still thought I was holding a grudge against her. Honestly, I was, but that wasn't the ultimate reason why her husband lost the contract. A few days ago, she published a post where she mentioned that they were already losing clients one after the other, and this contract termination was the last straw. However, she claimed that I did it solely out of revenge and called it a highly unprofessional act on our part. She even tagged our restaurant's Facebook page in her post, and now this whole situation has turned into chaos. In her post, she also wrote that because of this, she and her husband continue to lose clients. Although I admit that part of it was personal, most of the decision was related to professional considerations. I don't think Jeff and his father would have terminated the contract with her husband just because of my word. Nevertheless, I feel a little sorry for her. Well, I suggest you write in the comments right now how you would act in this situation. Would you terminate the contract with your toxic sister's husband or not? And now let's move on to the update. Update 1. Jeff discussed the situation with his father's lawyers, and he believes we did the right thing. So we are going to act through the court and demand that they remove their post. We are also filing a defamation lawsuit because her husband has been selling low-quality products. If we can find a more profitable offer, it is obvious that we will switch to another supplier. The fact that Jeff ended up marrying the owner of this company is just a coincidence. Instead of focusing on improving the work of his business, she decided to smear us in social media, trying to slander us. It's ridiculous that I even allowed myself to feel sorry for her after all she has done to me. Update 2. Jeff and his father filed a defamation lawsuit against Jess and her husband a couple of days ago. In a week, we have a meeting with a court-appointed mediator. Meanwhile, my mom decided to stand up for her poor little stepdaughter. It seems so absurd, as if I were back in my school years, but fortunately, it's not. Now I can just ignore them. Update 3. We won the defamation case. It was quite easy because Jeff's father's lawyers are real sharks, and they literally destroyed the opponent. Jess and her husband had to pay compensation for their actions. Now everything is behind us, and we can finally focus on planning our wedding. I look forward to the moment when I marry Jeff, the man of my dreams. So this is where the story ends. Be sure to write in the comments what you think about it. In defense of this toxic sister, I can say that it really looked like she wrote to her sister and she suddenly fired her husband. Well, somehow it didn't turn out very nice. But otherwise, everything is completely correct. The author is completely on her side, and I fully support her. There's really nothing more to add. In the end, the sister completely showed that her motives were so bad. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Watch our previous videos that you will see here, and good luck to you.